is a commercial building, not a castle or a military type of institution. But what useful and inexpensive changes can be made to potential targets like this, which will make them less vulnerable to acts? I mean, what would you recommend to people who are going through the mental exercise that unfortunately you are going through in reality?
This is still midstream, as it were. But first, on the safety management side, having two levels of redundancy in some respects clearly are not enough. We have water-cooled emergency generators. The system was put together in anticipation of a power outage, a blackout, a fire of some kind, not a bomb blast. I think we will have to give every consideration to having another level of emergency generation that is air-cooled.
It's a third level.
And which, of course, raises questions of fuel storage. I mean, there is no free lunch here, but I feel pretty confident that we're going to come out. We already have a review underway, looking for an air-cooled emergency generation plant that would at least handle basic systems and supplement the extensive emergency generation plant that we now have. We are looking to have, we were already in process of establishing decentralized communications operation centers. That, too, is an important thing to have, and I'm going to try and accelerate that capital project. It was begun about a year and a half ago. Third, I think that my own experience was that the most terrible thing that we faced was not knowing what was going on. That in truth, everyone in the towers was safe, but the police, the fire department, no one could get us information to tell us we were safe, and that the best thing that we could do was to wait in our offices, which ultimately we did for lack of a realistic choice at the time. Having redundant communication systems of various kinds, I think, is extremely important for high-rise buildings. And we already have begun to look at FM systems. They have to be controlled because in an emergency, you can get overload. And the transmissions either won't come through or you won't be able to figure out who's talking to whom. But redundant communication systems, if we had had those, the evacuation would have been a very different matter. So we've learned that as well. As for the more security-sensitive issues, I have to tell you that if somebody had asked me the question 6 months ago, do you think that you should eliminate or sharply restrict public parking at the World Trade Center or any of the other major public buildings in New York City, I would have said no. Everything's on the table now. I'm not saying that we will conclude that we should eliminate public parking, but I am saying that we're going to look very hard at that issue and issues like it, access to our subgrades, and how, even as they continue, if they continue, how they will be delimited. It is a difficult balance. This is a crossroads, the World Trade Center, but I think with the help of law enforcement officials, government officials, and outside expertise, we will have to tilt the balance a little. Not happy about it, but I think it's clearly called for.
Two final questions to the Commissioner. First is, what else have you thought about in terms of restricting, if at all, the availability of explosives in terms of dealing with this new threat? Second, and this is a specific one, there were reports that warnings were received from a Palestinian terrorist group that a bomb would be planted in a New York City skyscraper in January unless the 400 Palestinians deported from Israel in December were allowed to return. Was it treated as a credible threat? If so, was New York City on a heightened security alert at the time of the bombing? So the first question on explosives, the second one here.
I think we have to use a lot of common sense as far as restrictions on explosives. Obviously, they're used for commercial purposes, and I'm not able to give you a quick answer, but I think a lot of it has to be looked at in terms of its impact on business. I've talked to our bomb technicians, our bomb experts, and they're very much aware, very much sensitive to the fact that a lot of explosives are used every day legitimately and are necessary. So I think a lot of staff work has to be done before we come out and say what we're going to limit or what we're going to restrict. As far as the threat in January, yes, there was a threat that was received. It was it said on words to the effect that unless the Palestinians were accepted back in, or the people that Israel had ejected were accepted back in by Israel, I believe the threat was received, let's say on the 22nd of January, that by the 24th of January there would be a bombing in New York City. Nothing more specific than that. We did go on a heightened state of readiness in the sense that we notified the missions. As you know, we have over 100 missions to the United Nations in New York City. Certainly the Israeli mission was notified. Additional security was put in place. The explosion was to take place by January 24th. There was a subsequent message that extended that time to January 26th. It was a self-limiting notification. After that period of time, somewhere after that period of time, it was, in essence, a stand down as far as that notification was concerned. But we did take it seriously. We did notify certainly people that we believe to be at risk.
There's unfortunately an eerie similarity, and I take it that that is still, you're still taking those kinds, that message seriously and relating it. Mr. Sensenbrenner.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Now, I have a couple of real brief questions because there are some other very important witnesses, which I hope we were able to get to in a timely manner. But they're directed toward Mr. Brezhnev. It appears to me from your testimony and that of Commissioner Kelly that this bomb was very well placed, either by accident or by design. It could not have been in a more sensitive area in the parking garage in terms of immobilizing the services that are provided by the World Trade Center. Do you screen employees that are hired to work in the World Trade Center and other major buildings, run them through some kind of a background check with the police department or other security agencies just to make sure that you're not hiring someone who will be snooping around to see where the sensitive points are?
Well, not the, we have 9,000 employees at the Port Authority. Some of our employees do, in fact, go through various kinds of background checks. We also have thousands of contract employees, particularly at the World Trade Center. So I think the fullest answer to your question would be not the kind of background check that your question implies.
Has any consideration been given to issuing badges that would restrict access by employees to certain areas within the World Trade Center?
Well, that in fact is true. Our areas of the World Trade Center where we have our electronic systems, for example, transformers, our power sources and so on, are in fact restricted and have very limited access. The area where this explosion appears to have taken place is purely a public area. It is on a ramp that leads toward an exit from the garage area. That would not be an area that would be at all restricted.
Now, relative to restriction or potential closure of the underground parking garage, I did note before the hearing that there was a security assessment that recommended closing the underground parking garage, which I think was rejected for good reason, because my visits to New York are few and far between, but the parking is atrocious, you know, no matter where you are in the city, and taking away that number of spaces would make it even worse. Having said that,
the subway, Jim.
do you have a suit of armor for me for that? The question that I want to ask relative to that is, it seems to me that there is kind of a medium that would not relate to the closing of the parking garage, but would allow for the inspection of vans and trunks of cars and things, places where bombs could perhaps be hidden. Has that ever been considered before now?
It was in the array of alternative possibilities in one of the reports, measures similar to that. As I said, everything's on the table, but one has to think about the nature of the World Trade Center, with its restaurants and shops. Events take place there. Having trunks opened up, would we say that a wrapped box had to be opened? Would we be x-raying boxes? This is a big step. Again, we are going to be in consultation with experts in the field as well as law enforcement officials in thinking about and deciding how to go forward in these areas. But there are a number of elements to weigh here.
Yeah. Have there been any types of gradations of security protections considered, similar to the 4 levels of security at airports in the United States, where if there is information that there's a potential terrorist threat, the FAA or law enforcement can order that the security be heightened, as it was during the Gulf War?
We were in the process of adding closed-circuit TV to the underground garage areas, though that, of course, is as a recorder and as more of a security measure for more typical routine kinds of security security threats. We also have, I should note, the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey has its own police department, and it has a police complement of 40 uniformed police at the World Trade Center and 160 private guards. That is a part of our security operation. But and the public parking area itself is staffed, but there are parts of the garage up to this point where cars can move in and out without being reviewed or inspected.
I have one last quick question of Commissioner Kelly. The reports are that the explosive was 1,000 to 1,500 pounds of dynamite. Can you let us know how much space that amount of dynamite would fill up?
I don't know. Those reports, I think, were just speculation in the press. And we have not, as far as I know, the bomb technicians have not determined the size or the nature of the explosive. It's still out there. They still have not made a determination.
Okay, well, if it was dynamite, how much does 1,000 to 1,500 pounds of dynamite fill up?
I think you could certainly speculate that it would fill up a van.
Thank you.
Mr. Edwards.
No questions.
Mr. Chair.
Very briefly, just to follow up, gentlemen, on what was just asked by Mr. Sensenbrenner. Commissioner, when the law enforcement authorities believe that they understand the physical nature of this explosive, I believe that we in this subcommittee in the Congress would be very interested in that information, because it then leads to other questions. How easy or difficult is it to access this kind of explosive, to put together this kind of bomb? Because that's a matter that I think we would want to address in legislation similar to what the chairman is offering today. Thank you. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Schiff. Mr. Sangmeister.
Well, in the order of brevity, I would like to follow up a little bit on that question. The purpose of this committee, of course, is to see whether or not legislation is going to be forthcoming that can be helpful. If you know, maybe you don't know, and I guess this would be addressed to you, Mr. Kelly. If I wanted to buy a stick of dynamite in the state of New York today, do you know what I have to go through, or what kind of an inspection is made of my past, or what kind of documents do I have to sign? Do you have any idea what is involved?
No, you need some form of licenses to sell it. I'm not certain what you need to buy it, and there is some sort of recording process. I'm not totally familiar with it, but there is a licensing process to sell it, not necessarily to buy it.
But then you can't really tell us how easily accessible it is to the average individual that may want to buy an explosive.
I mean, we know that there is a fair amount of explosives that disappear, used legitimately on construction sites, on demolition sites, and